Thank you. And what an honor this is. Thank you so much. Last July, I turned 65 years old. So that I know. Nowhere near retiring. I don't have that luxury. My husband gets a government cheese now, so that'll keep us going for a while, but I still got to work. But what I'm finding now that I am 65 is looking ahead a little bit. My life isn't over yet. I have a lot of plans, what I want to do as I go forward, but also reevaluating my past and reflecting and just wondering over that question over and over. Where the hell have you been? And when I look at all the relationships I've had with family, with friends, with lovers, with God, with professional people, I just hold one person that kind of taught me a lot, and that was my cousin Frankie. Cousin Frankie was my Aunt Josephine's son. Aunt Josephine was my mother's older sister, and they lived right across from us, so we were close to each other and pretty close in age too, but we could not have been more different. I think cousin Frankie had demon spawn in him. He just was not a really, really filled up with light kind of guy. He was the exact polar opposite because I was this meek little child. I was number 6 out of 9 in my family, so I was the quiet one. I was the sedate one. I didn't want to be the gay one. Once I got a little bit older, I wanted to hide that as much as possible. But cousin Frankie lived his life out there, and any chance he got, he would hang around with me. And my mother always said, you gotta hang around with cousin Frankie. A little bit of your goodness is gonna rub off on him. Say a bunch of Hail Marys for him. So I'd always say Hail Marys for cousin Frankie. And while I was saying those Hail Marys, he'd be holding me down, pushing my face in the ground, giving me noogies, slapping me, holding me up against the wall. It just was horrible. It never worked out. We were like oil and water, and he beat me up all the time. My mother insisted, stay close to him. She and my Aunt Jo would take us shopping to EJ Corvettes for clothing, and he'd have to go, I was still in the little kitty department, and he'd be in the husky department getting his clothes. Until about 7th grade, and that's when he went through his growth spurt and started shaving in 7th grade. And then we just walked over to EJ Corvettes and he'd shoplift the clothing. He wouldn't bother with any kind of money. He was headed down a really, really bad path. In 7th grade, he had this idea that he had to give gangster names to everybody in the family. And my mother said, Dickie, don't worry about it. My mother called me Dickie. Dickie, don't worry about that. Just get your gangster name from him. And he had... I said, great. So he gave somebody the name Willie Knuckles was one. He was Frankie Poison or something. And of course, my name, and it stuck, was Dickie Fanook. So I was, so yeah, if you know, you know. You go look it up. Go Google it. But I was Dickie Fanook. Dickie Fanook. And I just couldn't live down that name. And he'd say, oh, Dickie Fanook, you're the one that's going to keep us praying into heaven someday. Our lives just started going in two opposite directions. I get into high school. He's kind of dropping out of high school, and he's getting into a lot of problems with the law. Petty larceny, breaking into cars, breaking into houses. So he's really in trouble with the law. He kind of was just headed down this one path. Me, by the time I got to high school, I was headed down this other path of really wanting to hide. I just wanted to hide from the world. I did not want to be who I was. So that led me to joining, like you said, a monastery. And I joined the monastery at the age of 16 because every 16-year-old knows what they want to do with their penis for the rest of their lives. He goes in this direction. He doesn't graduate. I go into a monastery. All I remember is coming visiting, and we're not hanging around that much anymore, but Aunt Jo would always be complaining about him. Aunt Jo. I always say she was part of the triumvirate. I'm going to date myself right now. Aunt Jo had this raspy voice with a cigarette right there, and she was one of the triumvirate of Selma Diamond, Brenda Vaccaro, and my Aunt Jo. See, some people know those names. And she'd say, Dickie, that's And the name that she had, she didn't use the gangster name for him. He was always, you no good son of a bitchin' bastard. So that was his name. Oh, that no good son of a bitchin' bastard broke into a house last week. I had to go and get him out on parole. It just was way too much. And she kept saying, I just hope he stays away. Stay away this time. I was kind of going through the same thing. I just wanted to stay away. So when I went into the monastery, I stayed away. It just wasn't working for me, though. So I asked for something harder. I said to my superiors, give me hard work. And they sent me as a missionary to Peru for 10 years. And I was happy when they made that decision. I was really convinced. I was about 25. I was convinced it's better if I go to Peru, there won't be any temptation, because in Latin America, homosexuality doesn't exist. Well, let me tell you. So I'm hearing these stories as I come back for visits about Cousin Frankie and what's going on. But before I go to Peru, there is this big, big, big going away party for me. The whole St. Anthony's parish is there. I got 8 brothers and sisters, I told you. They're there with their kids, my aunts, my uncles. They're all over the place. And something weird starts happening at this party. People started coming out of the woodwork and giving me their deepest, darkest secrets. My Aunt Nettie pins me over in the corner of the backyard. And my Aunt Nettie is like, she was this platinum blonde, another cigarette smoker, my mother's younger sister, and she was a prototype for the Real Housewives of Mount Vernon, New York. I mean, she was a piece of work, and she said, Richie. She called me Richie. She didn't call me Dickie. Oh, Richie, I gotta let you know right now, your Uncle Champ has been cheating on me for 15 years, and I've known about it all along, but I never opened my mouth because what are you gonna do? I'm like, okay. My Uncle D, my father's brother, comes up to me, and he goes, oh, Richie, baby. He called me Richie, baby. And he said, before you go, I got to tell you something. And he gives me a cigar. And I'm over in a corner with him. He said, when I was in World War II coming back, I had a baby with a woman that ain't your Aunt Grace. And I never let anybody know in the family. So when your father drops you off from Sunday church and since he's going for groceries, he's paying my child support money. I'm like, oh, shit. This happens with a bunch of other people. I'm like, what is going on? Did they think that, I had an in? Did they think I was hearing their confession? I wasn't a priest. I was a brother. For those of you not of the Catholic persuasion, a priest does sacraments, says the Mass, forgives sins. A brother does good works and lives in a community. What I usually tell people to make it easier is a brother is just like a nun, but with a penis. So that's what I was. But they kept coming up telling me these stories. My cousin Muji and my cousin Adelina made these 400 cannoli and put it out on this big table that spelled, Peru needs you. And it was wild. And the party's going on, and all of a sudden it's breaking up. And just as that table just spelled out P-nay-yo, those cannolis were going fast. I look over to the side where the street is, and I see this hand come out of a car. And it's my cousin Frankie. He says, get in. I'm like, oh, shit. He says, Richie, I had to say, Richie, Dickie, he didn't call me Richie. He called me Dickie Fanook. He said, Dickie Fanook, I'll let you know I'm praying for you, but you got to pray for me. And I got to come clean. I haven't been living a good life. I've been getting in a lot of trouble. You hear that from my mother. You hear it from your mother. But I'm doing things that you got to pray for. I'm helping this group of people, and we got to make some people disappear. I'm like, oh, fuck. And I'm looking around the car, because I hadn't seen him in months. He said, just pray for me when you're down in Peruvia. I said, okay. I said, okay. He leaves. I go to Peru, and within 6 months of writing back and forth to people and talking, this was pre-internet days, Cousin Frankie disappears. Not a word. Not a word. Days turn into weeks, turn into months, turn into years. It became like a family joke. People would say things like, don't stay away as long as Cousin Frankie. Or, where's Waldo? Fuck that. Where's Cousin Frankie? And it was, we thought he had cement shoes at the bottom of a Long Island Sound or something. We had no idea where he was. So he just disappeared. In a way, I had been doing that disappearing act like him too. I had hid in a monastery in a foreign country. My name changed again. My name for 14 years was Brother Mark. I changed my persona. I couldn't be who I was. I was just out of the picture for myself and for the world. Took on this whole new identity. I couldn't take that anymore. And after about 10 years of that, I said, I gotta bag it. And I left the monastery. And about 5 months only after that, my mom died. And it was sad. I was still living in Peru, but I came up and I went to the wake. Again, what I started doing is looking around me. I didn't think there'd be any cousin Frankie, but I started playing what they call the Italian wake syndrome. I don't know if you know about that. With the Italian wake syndrome, what it is, it's this theory that when you have an Italian wake, nobody remembers who shows up. Everybody remembers who doesn't show up. So I'm looking around, who's coming, I'm doing the whole thing, and it was a nice send-off for my mom. It really was. We go to the church. After the church, we go to the cemetery, and we bury her. And I just had this rental car, and I parked way in the back, and all of a sudden, this other car comes up to me with these tinted windows. And I see, just like I saw at my party 10 years before, a hand come out. Then I see the window come down, and it's cousin Frankie. And I stop. And I said, what? I stuttered. What? Where? Who? What? Cousin Frankie, where have you been? And he just said, well, I was down the block getting a cup of coffee. I'm like, no, where have you been for the last 12 years? He said, get in. I get in. He gives me a hug. He said, I couldn't stay away. Your mother deserves better. I had to show up. But this is between you and me. And he finally came clean. He finally admitted that, yes, he was in the witness protection program. He had done an awful lot of hits, and he was arrested on drug charges, and the feds offered to him the opportunity to go into hiding with a completely new identity. So they put him down in South Carolina in this little podunk town running a pizzeria, and they gave him the name Johnny Smalls. Now, the feds either have no friggin' sense of humor or just like a heightened sense of irony, because cousin Frankie was like 400 pounds, and he had the name Johnny Smalls. So he told me all of this. He said, listen, the reason I'm telling you is you're the only one in this family that can keep this secret between you and me. And I figured he might be right about the secret. I mean, I kept the biggest secret for 34 years of me being gay. Nobody figured that out. Well, they actually did, but that's a different story. So he said, I just had to say the prayers. After you get out of this car, you never heard from me. He goes off. I never see the man again. In 2013, I do get word, somehow word got through to his family, that cousin Frankie, Johnny Smalls, died of natural causes. He died of a massive heart attack. He was enormous. He died of a massive heart attack. And I thought to myself, now that was his real disappearance. And I hadn't thought about him in years. And then when I turned 65, I started looking through my life again at the people that came, the people that left. And I realized that disappearing act that he did was something that I did too. There was a shadow of this. That changing of an identity that he had to do, I did too. So I'm having this opportunity at the age of 65 to just reflect. And I want to call to just have a coffee one night or a couple of beers. I want to call Dickie. And then I want to call Dickie Fanook over. And I want to call Richie over. And I want to call Brother Mark over. And I want to call Richard Cardillo into that circle. And I just want to put a few back and keep reflecting. Where the hell have you been? Thank you.
Richard Cardillo.